All right. What question do you think I would ask you as we get ready to head into the weekend on the Friday edition of the Steve Malzberg Show, final segment? What is a typhoon? It can't be good, and it's not good. And joining us now to talk about what has just ravaged the Philippines and is heading to Vietnam and beyond, a storm, Joe Bastardi, chief forecaster at Weather Bell. I believe, Joe, it would stretch from Maine to Florida. Is that how big this thing is?
Well, it's a big storm, but no, it'd probably be the type of thing where if it hit Charleston, South Carolina, the northern edge of the strong winds maybe near Norfolk, and the southern edge would probably be near Jacksonville. So it's a big storm. It's when you look at the Pacific Ocean, Steve, you got to remember that ocean has the warmest water in the world. There are many, many, many more typhoons in the Southwest Pacific than there are hurricanes in the Atlantic. Even in an off year, some of their off years are 30, 35 storms. So most of the global tropical activity comes from the Pacific Ocean. A lot of people don't understand that. And what's fascinating is that over the last 4 or 5 years, the Pacific has really shut down overall, and the Atlantic is shutting down too. So the fact of the matter is that we have a situation where just like that big tornado we saw in Oklahoma, where overall it's been a quiet year in the Pacific, and one monster develops, and everybody starts, going off.
Right. Well, describe for folks first of all what a typhoon is, and I think the winds.
Well, it's the same thing as a hurricane.
Yeah.
Except they're on average a little bit bigger and stronger because the Pacific is a warmer ocean than the Atlantic. Their scales, there have been 5 or 6 storms over the last 40, 50 years as strong as Haiyan. Typhoon Tip in 1970. We had Joan back in the 1950s, for instance, and we had one in 1994, 95. All of these storms were comparable to this, and they were actually measured. This one is a satellite estimate. There's no question that it's a great storm, and it's one of the top storms ever in that area, but it's part of what happens out there. You've got to realize there's been very little typhoon activity near that part of the Philippines over the last 5, 6 years. So that water has not been disturbed or revved up the way it is in other areas. And, of course, that buildup of energy is waiting for one of these things to come.
Right. And when you say warm water, of course, some folks may not know, and I believe I'm correct, that the warm water, the storm gains strength and builds volume and strength out of that, correct?
Well, that's exactly right. The fact is that the warm, moist air contains a lot more energy than cold, dry air. It's one of my global warming arguments all the time. That a 15-degree rise in the Arctic is nothing compared to a 1-degree fall in the tropical Pacific as far as the energy budget of the Earth goes. People don't understand that. So what happens is if you do get a situation, the water's not too terribly warm in there. This was just under perfect upper atmospheric conditions, too, for it to develop. It's sort of like our version of Andrew.
Right.
Remember how Andrew came roaring westward and was deepening rapidly? 1947, the Palm Beach hurricane. What's interesting is I brought up 1935 on a show I was on earlier. The Labor Day hurricane, 1935. Now, that occurred relative to where this occurred, about 550 miles further north in the Florida Keys. There were winds there reportedly over 200 miles an hour with that storm.
Wow.
That, to me, is a more extreme event. Speaking of extremes, relative to where it is, speaking of extremes, I just saw something happen in the Atlantic Ocean that in all the years that I've watched hurricanes, studied all these charts, I've never seen.
What?
We're in a warm version of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. We're supposed to be getting a lot of storms. I have never seen a warm AMO, that's what we call it, produce so little activity relative to intensity. It's amazing. It's as if we were back in the 1960s and 70s with El Niños going.
Well, let me give you another one. We're talking to Joe Bastardi, chief forecaster of Weather Bell. We only have 2 minutes, but there's a story out at the Washington Post reporting that at Washington Post of all places that the National Snow and Ice Data Center has found that the Antarctic ice has reached record levels. The previous record was set in 2012.
This is old news to guys like me. In fact, I did a whole talk on Heartland about this whole situation, that, people talk globally as long as it's convenient to ignore the other part of the globe. And there's this cycle that goes back and forth. Global sea ice is above normal and back where it was in 1979 right now.
And the Earth's temperature hasn't gone up in 15 years. And the latest report,
and it's actually been trending down.
Right, and the latest report says this could continue for the next 20 years.
This is all, believe me, Steve. Dr. Bill Gray of Colorado State, the same hurricane expert, had all this nailed in the 70s. It's just every time I look at this more and more, I'm convinced science is not involved. It's got to be agenda-driven dribble, I call it. And you have climatic ambulance chasers who are constantly bringing these things up. You know, we've had the least extreme weather in the United States in recorded history, supposedly, this year.
Yeah, I know, but a week ago today, Barack Obama signed an executive order saying that any projects going forward have to account for global warming. It's insanity. Listen, Joe, I'm up against the hard break. It's the end of the show. Thank you very much. We'll speak to you soon.
Enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.
I love it. Joe Bastardi, chief forecaster at Weather Bell, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, you don't want to be in a typhoon. But Joe, indicating that it's a horrific storm. But, it's far from the storm of the CNN said the storm would stretch from Maine to Florida. But that's not true. Steve Malzberg Show. Have a great weekend, everybody.